Dirty work's a way of life for Leo Beckett.
What could you possibly say that would persuade me to assist you in a criminal activity?
Life's a battle for best mate tubes.
It's an uncertain world. You might go first.
Oh, don't think so, mate. I'm in excellent health.
And loves the triangle with girlfriend Rhiannon, Tube's ex-wife.
He knows.
I know he knows, but I don't acknowledge that I know.
But he'd never know.
No.
Dirty work.
Does that foot mean what I think it means?
Someone's got to do it. New drama with Neil Pearson starts Thursday, 16th of March on BBC One.
He brought this to himself. He had to suffer.
I put everything that I owned in the world on the line.
He's a greedy person.
Charles Dance and Nadeem Sawalha take centre stage in a dramatisation of an epic legal battle. Justice in Wonderland. Sunday at 10:05 on BBC Two.
The Day in Westminster, now on BBC Two, Dispatch Box with Steve Richards.
Very good evening to you. Now, as Labour continues to celebrate its 100th birthday, the government is under fire again over its handling of the health service. Labour set up the NHS, and in just about all those speeches that have been made to commemorate the centenary, the health service has been cited as the party's greatest achievement. Yet this afternoon at Prime Minister's Question Time, the heir to Keir Hardie, Clem Attlee and all the rest of them faced some tough questions on the government's priorities for the NHS and its level of spending. Health is usually a strong issue for Labour, but can New Labour get any of the credit? Barbara Castle, for example, told me last week the Blairites wouldn't have set up the NHS. It would have been far too expensive for them. Well, that raises another question. Is New Labour really a new political party? Big questions for my guest tonight, left-wing Labour MP Jeremy Corbyn, and one of New Labour's leading thinkers, Tony Wright. But first, a look at tomorrow's papers tonight with Sean Simon of The Telegraph. Sean, what have they got for us tomorrow morning?
Well, Steve, most of the papers have got this picture of the world's current most famous baby, the Mozambican baby that was born up a tree.
Which is kind of symbolises the whole drama,
the
captures
drama and the tragedy and all that.
In a single photo, okay?
Yeah, and it's a great photo.
We'll hear Claire Short talking about that later on in the programme.
Good. Here is one of the two big stories on the front pages, both of which stem from Commons answers, written answers sneaked out by Jack Straw this afternoon. First of which is about asylum, following on from the Afghan plane hijacking. That he's announced that very, very few of even the hostages in that hijacking will be given asylum. And
he hinted at that earlier, didn't he? We're going to get confirmation tomorrow. Yeah.
And well, I got the impression from the story that there was a certain amount of that in the written answer.
Right.
But that could be it's not quite clear. But he's certainly hinting that he wants the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees to be looked at again, and he wants a European directive to supersede the case law that currently prevails, essentially to make it harder for people to get refugees to get asylum.
And then, in another ridiculously busy day for Jack Straw, he's also generated this headline in the Telegraph.
8 o'clock in the morning, as some of us were ridiculed for predicting that he would back in autumn 1998. He is going to release General Pinochet, who is going to go back to Chile before the various foreign governments and the pressure groups can do anything about it.
He'll be flying off at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning.
That's what we're led to believe.
So unless the pressure groups are watching tonight, he'll be out.
They better be watching Dispatch Box,
They
Steve.
better be watching Dispatch Box. Sean, for now, thanks very much. Much more from you a bit later on. Thanks. First, though, to the Commons, where Tony Blair's been saying for a long time that he wants to create an NHS that's the envy of the world. But doctors and nurses continue to talk about underfunding, and William Hague is still attacking on the government's failure to cut waiting lists.
Isn't it time the Prime Minister gave all the facts? I have here the briefing the Department of Health sent to number 10 for Prime Minister's questions a few weeks ago. Number 10 briefing for PM questions. As the honourable members opposite should listen to this because the Prime Minister doesn't read it out. Number 10 briefing for PM questions. Fact 1. At the end of September 1999, there were 264,000 more patients waiting over 13 weeks for an outpatient appointment than at the end of March 1997. We've asked the Prime Minister several times for that information, but he never actually reads out that information. We now know the civil servants give him the facts, but he doesn't actually read out the facts because he daren't do so in this House. And isn't he in danger of being the Polaroid Prime Minister who turns up for photo calls at hospitals but doesn't listen to what is happening and blames doctors and managers and now blames the media? Isn't it time he took the blame himself and made sure that clinical priorities were actually dealt with first, otherwise he really will be all mouth and no delivery.
Nobody disputes there are problems that need to be sorted out, but we are taking action to sort them out. The £21 billion extra investment, all of the accident and emergency departments being renovated, 37 new hospitals, the largest capital programme ever, 4,000 more nurses, 2,000 more doctors, a 60% increase in cancer specialists, NHS Direct, the new primary care groups, handling 3 times the budget of the old 2-tier fund holders, and 500,000 more operations. That is not to say there aren't still many other problems to be sorted out, but we are trying to sort them out. The difference is that we see these problems as a reason for action. He sees them as an excuse for undermining the health service in principle.
Does it remain the Prime Minister's intention over 5 years to get health spending in this country up to European levels? Now, if it does he think that the tax cut in April will assist that process? And does he not acknowledge that the pledge that he and his party were elected on was to save the NHS before cutting tax? Isn't it a case that we're getting tax bribes from the government instead of saving lives from the government?
Madam Speaker, the £21 billion is extra money for the National Health Service. It's also infinitely more than the Liberal Democrats have ever promised to people. And indeed, we've already put in more money into the health service than the Liberal Democrats promised. And, Madam Speaker, the plain fact of the matter is, yes, we can get additional money into the health service if we manage the economy properly. And it's important that we do that, which is why we pursued policies that have given us 800,000 extra jobs in the economy, that have given us the best record of inflation of any European country at the moment, and that have managed to cure the appalling debt that we inherited from the Conservatives. If we followed the recipe set out by the Liberal Democrats and spent and spent and spent without any idea of where the money came from, we would not be able to maintain the funding in the consistent way the country needs.
Tony Wright, give us an insight into both New Labour and the state of the NHS by addressing the question raised by Barbara Castle, actually, in the interview I did with her last week. Would New Labour have invented the NHS as we have got it now?
Yeah, of course it would, because an institution which is fair, which is effective, because it's the most cost-effective way of delivering healthcare in Europe, would be exactly the kind of system that would have commended itself to the kind of modernisers who now run the Labour Party.
What, with the billions and billions of pounds still needed for it,
yeah.
The talk in this government of greater involvement of the private sector, the huge financial demands for decades to come, the opposition of doctors, they would have still gone ahead with it, you think?
Well, as you know from the history of the National Health Service was born around many of the controversies that surround it now. I mean, you remember Nye Bevan having to stuff the mouths of the consultants with gold, as it was called, to get them on board the system in the first place. So it was built on all kinds of historic compromise. And in fact, I mean, if we to explore the issue, I mean, it was the failure to get hold of the power of the professions inside the health service right at the beginning that we're still paying the price for in things like the Shipman case today. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we should have reformed years ago that we never did, that we're finally getting around to doing now.
Jeremy Corbyn, is that your view, that New Labour would have set up the NHS as we have got it today?
No, I don't think they'd have set it up as it is today. I think they would have gone much further down the road of sort of internal markets and stress points within it than it exists at the moment. But I think Tony's right on the earlier point that the NHS principally is set up on a basis of contracting arrangements between consultants, doctors and so on. It was always a weakness in the NHS. It's still a weakness today. It would be much more effective if the GPs were salaried GPs working for the NHS and the consultants likewise. And the problem Nye Bevan had to face was that he had this unrelenting opposition from the medical hierarchies. Perhaps with hindsight, if he'd faced them out, the result would have been an NHS with a salaried staff rather than this contracting culture. The problem for the NHS is the contracting culture, the internal market, which we inherited from Conservatives, and now the private finance initiative, which superficially looks great. You get a new hospital built at nil cost. The problem is we pay for it then for 20 or 30 years afterwards, and we lose control of it.
Okay, you've raised a funding issue there. If I could broaden the discussion, Tony, by asking you, given the fact that one way or another a lot of money has got to be found for the health service, education as well, the government accepts more money has to be found. Where does, for example, in the forthcoming budget, a 1p cut in income tax fit in with the new Labour philosophy?
I think that's fairly straightforward, because it so happens that we live in such a benign economic environment at the moment, and and I'll put my partisan hat on and say thanks to Gordon Brown, that we have lots of money sloshing around. It so happens that it's possible to deliver on a tax cut. And let's not be sniffy about tax cut. Actually, providing people with money to spend for themselves is not a bad objective.
It's a question of hard choices, to coin a phrase, isn't it? And you're claiming that much more money needs to be spent on the hospitals.
Yeah. If though at the moment you can combine a tax cut which helps. I mean, we're not talking about the rich. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of ordinary wage earners who will benefit from that tax cut. If we can combine that with the kind of scale of investment in public services that we're talking about now, we've kind of cracked it. But I mean, if you're asking more generally, then I think we're onto different ground. I mean, I do have a worry that we've so sort of sterilised the tax argument. It's almost like you can't mention tax in polite company anymore. Now, I don't think you can do that as a party of the left. I mean, a party of the left can never compete with a party of the right if tax cutting is the issue.
Yeah, but Tony, this is exactly what we're trying to do. Gordon gets up and proudly says we've got the lowest rates of corporate taxation in Europe and they're going to go down further, and he's going to cut income tax. The problem is we do need public investment in housing, in health, in education. We do need all those things, and above all, we need a much higher state old age pension. You can't do the two things unless you're going to go down the private finance road, which this government seems awfully keen on, which costs us all more in the long run.
Let's ask a clarifying question here, Tony. Would you repeat the income tax pledge that you made before the last election, which was done for all kinds of tactical reasons? No. But you wouldn't.
The straight answer is no. I think the problem is there's kind of such an inheritance of bad news on the tax front as far as the Labour Party is concerned, and as on so many other issues, in a sense, we're still putting to bed issues that dogged us in the 1980s. I think public opinion has moved on enormously now. I think people know that if you're going to fulfil your pledges on health, education, all the things we talk about, revenue's got to come from somewhere. If it doesn't come from direct income taxation, it's going to come from other sources of revenue. I think in this sense, public opinion is actually ahead of the politicians.
Yeah, public opinion, as I perceive it, certainly supports higher rates of taxation for the better off, and would certainly countenance higher rates of corporate taxation.
What's your evidence for that? Because I know surveys always say that, but whenever a political party advocates that at a general election, it tends to be slaughtered.
I talk to people on the Holloway Road.
And what do they say?
They want good quality services, and they also are deeply concerned about the ever-widening gap between the richest and poorest within our society. Now, but Gordon Brown always keeps away from this redistribution
argument. Taxing people on 100,000 plus a little more, that wouldn't pay for the quality services, and that's the problem.
What I tell them is it would go some way towards it, as would corporate taxation. It wouldn't solve the entire problem, but we have to recognise that if we want to have good quality services, and above all good quality pensions, then they're going to have to be paid for by people in work. Now, people are prepared to go along with that, I find, in general.
The old cry of tax the rich simply doesn't work because there aren't enough rich people, and I'm afraid if we talk about tax, you're talking about tax on ordinary wage earners, and that's your constituents, my constituents. So we're not talking about somebody else, talking about people that we represent.
When you ask people the straight question, are you prepared to pay more tax to spend on education, they say yes.
But at the same time, people, as you say, it's your contradiction. People want, on the whole, direct income taxation to be kept as low as possible. They want public services to be kept as good as possible. Now, that's a circle that's very difficult to square. Gordon Brown, of course, has been squaring it through his famous stealth taxes. Yeah. Now, I mean, I regard that as being very sensible. But if people don't...
You run out of stealth taxes, though, don't you?
Well, no sign of it yet. If people don't want to be taxed in the old ways, they will be taxed in the new ways if they're to have the services that they say that they want. But rather than do that in a kind of devious way and pretend that we're not doing it, much better to bring people into the conversation so they see what we're doing. So I think actually they're on our side.
Let's move on to the social agenda, which we've been talking about in the review of the newspapers there, where Jack Straw's never-ending in tray is on all the front pages. Is the Straw agenda, as he would argue, he's talked about how he's his constituency's shop steward, Blackburn's shop steward, is the Straw agenda on asylum seekers, Pinochet and all the other familiar territory, in any way at all, as far as you think, Jeremy, recognisably Labour?
In the case of Pinochet, originally, yes, because he followed a strictly legal role in that he was saying the courts would decide and he would act on the basis of the courts. Peculiarly, in November the 5th, he changed tack and wrote to General Pinochet and said, well, if you have a medical examination, we'll keep it quiet and then we'll go on from there. We'll know in a few hours what the outcome of that is. I desperately hope it is that Pinochet is going to be examined again, because I believe he may well be fit to stand trial, and he stands trial. My fear is that Pinochet is going to be on his way home.
Well, what about the wider issues?
But on asylum seekers,
it
seems to me that he made a bad mistake in the case of the Afghan refugees. He announced that he was minded, in his famous words, that they were not suitable to take asylum and wanted to see them all go home. The reality is, people who have come out of Afghanistan, who have been persecuted by the Taliban, if they went back, they deserve asylum. And I would like to see Jack Straw standing up a bit more for the right of people to claim asylum from wherever they come, for whatever reason is appropriate within the terms of the Convention. But above all, not to pander towards this sort of Daily Mail constant attack on asylum seekers. There are reasons people seek asylum.
OK, well, Tony, there are some who've argued, I think I might have done it myself every now and again, that in some ways, in an underrated way, Jack Straw reminds me of Tony Blair in many ways. He seems to be conservative on constitutional reform. He likes to be tough on crime. He's got this interest in the media. I mean, is he, and the agenda he's following, representative of the new Labour thinking? I
thought you were going to say Keir Hardie, actually, rather than Tony. But no, for reasons that I'll tell you in just a minute. But I mean, I've got a particular quarrel with Jack Straw about freedom of information.
Yes.
Which I won't bore you with now, and we shall return to.
But suffice to say, you don't think he's
at some point. But
delivering.
But I tell you what, Jack has been very good at doing, and as has Tony Blair, which is to remember a very old Labour Keir Hardie tradition, which is actually to say, rights and duties go together. There was actually nobody stronger on duties, as it happened, than Keir Hardie, the founder of the Labour Party. I mean, if you're looking for someone to denounce loafers and scroungers, Keir Hardie was your man. The man who said there's no free rides here, there's no gyro culture, that the state has rights that you have to exercise, but duties have to go with it too.
By a huge amount.
That's quite an important linkage. We forgot that for many, many years, but the original British socialist tradition had those things coupled together.
You very explicitly made a link with the past and Keir Hardie. Is it your view, Jeremy, and I know it's Tony Benn's view, that in effect New Labour is a new political party?
I think there are people around New Labour who would like to think of it as a new political party. I don't include Tony in those.
Tony Blair or Tony Benn?
Or Tony Wright.
Oh, Tony Wright. So there's a lot of Tonys here.
They're all called Tony. They're all called Tony except me.
Yes, yes. The Tony Party.
The Tony Blair Party. There are people. There are people around Millbank. There are people around the Prime Minister who see it as a centrally controlled new party, new operation. The character of the Labour Party at the grassroots has not changed very much at all. It really isn't that different. And I think that those that think the Labour Party has so changed are actually wrong. And the problems that the Labour Party leadership is having over the Mayor of London, had in Wales and had in Scotland, is this, if you like, for want of a better word, control freakery from Millbank.
OK, that's a prompt for another discussion for another day. Thank you both very much indeed. Back to the Commons now, where that other Tony, or one of the Tonys, Tony Blair, also had to face some tricky questions over another old Labour, new Labour issue, Ken Livingstone. He's consistently attacked the government's plans to let the private sector have a say in the running of the London Underground. And this week, Labour's official candidate for London Mayor, Frank Dobson, also said he might think again, proposing a panel of experts to take a look in at it all. And William Hague is loving it.
Which of the Labour candidates for Mayor of London supports... supports the government's policy on the tube.
Madam Speaker, I think he should allow me to run the Labour Party and he can run the Conservative Party.
This is a question about the government's policy. Which of the Labour candidates for Mayor of London supports the government's policy on the tube?
Speaker, the policy on the tube has been well set out and is in fact supported. No, is in fact supported. Is in fact supported. It is the policy that will be carried through. But I repeat to him, I will take care of running the Labour Party and he can run the Conservative Party.
So the answer, Madam Speaker, the answer is that there is no Labour candidate who supports the government's policy on the tube. And wasn't it all summed up by the Labour spokesman who said, basically, Frank can say what he likes about the tube, but the policy is the policy, and then added, of course, Frank's going to be his own man. Didn't the Deputy Prime Minister... The Deputy Prime Minister said that unless a candidate agrees to support the party manifesto, he cannot stand as a Labour candidate. So now that the official Labour candidate isn't going to support his policy, is he going to change the policy or is he going to impose a new candidate?
Speaker, it's nonsense what he's saying about the policy, but of course, Madam Speaker, the real difference is between this party that supports a public-private partnership and the Conservative Party that is going to privatise the whole of the tube system, so that people know if they vote for the Conservative candidate, then the same privatisation that happened with the railways is going to happen with the tube. That is not the case with us, Madam Speaker. And I repeat to him, Madam Speaker, I suggest he looks after the problems of running the Conservative Party, where I notice, since there's a lot of talk about independent candidates, he's decided to appoint an independent as his shadow chancellor.
Tony Blair this afternoon, and a reference there to Mike Portillo, and he's going to play that joke one way or another many, many more times to come. All eyes here at Westminster will be on Ken Livingstone on BBC One's Question Time programme tomorrow night. Well, the Prime Minister also had a go at independent television this afternoon and its decision to abolish the old News at 10 programme and replace it with a shorter bulletin at 11 o'clock. Although Mr Blair has no direct say in the matter, he'll be well aware that his intervention today will not have gone unnoticed.
Is the Prime Minister aware that the viewing figures for the ITN news at 11 o'clock are much lower than they were when the same news, the ITN news, was at 10 o'clock? Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, join with me in calling on ITN to review its decision to change the time to 11 o'clock and put it back to 10 o'clock, which was the national institution that we all love?
Well, Madam Speaker, I share his views on this issue, and I know that the Culture Committee are taking evidence on it later this week. Although, of course, this is a matter for the ITC, obviously. I mean, I personally like News at 10. I also had some concerns about the likely consequences of moving it, as did many people in this House. I think those concerns, I'm afraid, have been largely borne out by what has happened since then. And it had developed News at 10 an important place in our national life, and I fear the decision to move it eroded that position, and I very much hope that they think again.
Tony Blair this afternoon. Incidentally, the Commons Culture Committee is considering the whole issue of the death of News at 10 tomorrow morning, and we'll show you what they said here on Dispatch Box tomorrow night. One thing all the news programmes are leading with at the moment, of course, is the crisis in Mozambique, which we mentioned at the beginning of the programme. The terrible flooding there dominated questions to the International Development Secretary, Claire Short, this afternoon.
We found 2 extra helicopters that will be working tomorrow. We're sending out 2 planes tomorrow. They'll have 30 volunteers from the UK who are experts in emergencies, a lot of fire brigade people, and so on. 79 boats with engines. We need helicopters working with boats. If we had all the helicopters we could get, we still couldn't get all the people. We need helicopters and boats. We're going to drop boats so that people can get into them, and then we need bigger boats to pull in. So I assure the honourable gentleman we will do all in our power to get whatever equipment we can get there as fast as possible. If the MOD is the best source, we'll use it. If not, not.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm sure the House welcomes what the Secretary has just said, but I think the point is that our responsibility is to do all that we can today. And if it takes 2 days to fly helicopters down there from Europe, surely the sooner we start, the sooner they will be there, and the sooner they will be flying and saving lives and distributing food. It was obvious from the response that happened on Monday that cooperation between her department and the Ministry of Defence is not all that it might be. Will she therefore reconsider this matter? Will she make it a key focus and priority to cooperate with the Ministry of Defence, get more helicopters flown into the region, get them saving lives today?
No, I'm sorry, Madam Speaker. The honourable gentleman is misinformed. There's absolutely no problem of lack of cooperation with the Ministry of Defence. He might remember, for example, Hurricane Mitch, that we happened to have a British ship full of helicopters just there. We have to be opportunistic in these emergencies. We have to take what's in region and what's available as rapidly as possible. If we don't get to these people, even if they manage to cling onto their trees, they won't have water and food. We're talking about human life in very short periods of time. So I have no preference for any source, and that's my instruction to my officials. As I've said yesterday, there's not a shortage of money either. It's getting things deployed in theatre fast. And that's, if the Ministry of Defence can help, we'll go with them. If not, we'll go elsewhere. And you should use MOD forces when they can help quickly. You shouldn't be biased to them and be slower and more expensive. That would be a very foolish way to proceed.
Claire Short. Over on the opposition benches, the Conservative backbencher Theresa Gorman was banned from the Commons for a month for failing to register her business interests properly. It's the longest suspension ever handed out to an MP. A lot of her colleagues turned up to speak on her behalf. But all eyes, of course, were on the lady herself, who managed to be penitent and defiant, as only she can.
I can see in retrospect that I have handled the matters less than satisfactorily. Of course, I could have done them better, but I do draw the line at being called a liar, which the report states, and I find that offensive and quite unnecessary and unreasonable. Yeah. And if I can quote from an interview in the Daily Telegraph, which was given by the Commissioner, Miss Filkin, on her appointment to her present role, when she said, "I am aware that all of us can make mistakes and look foolish. One can always reflect on how things could have been done better. Madam Speaker, I rest my case."
That was Theresa Gorman. This is Sean Simon, back with the papers. What else have they got, Sean?
Well, the Independent here has got Millbank sends Jeer Ken email to loyalists. This is the brilliant, feared Millbank media manipulation machine has sent an email around all its supporters asking them to go to question time tomorrow.
This is the BBC
sit in the audience.
question time,
yeah, BBC
not Prime Minister's question time. Yeah.
Sit in the audience and pack it with anti-Ken sentiment. But with their usual brilliance, they sent it to Ken's campaign manager and the newspapers.
And so yeah.
It hasn't made them look too clever.
Yeah.
There's
formidable machine at the moment.
It is remarkable. There's a lot of speculation. There was a lot of speculation. The Independent's still wondering whether he might announce he's going to stand tomorrow as an independent. But most people think that's probably not going to happen.
Okay.
Down here we've got the brilliant Simon Hoggett sketch, where he lays in with great delicacy to the succession of sycophantic backbenchers who lined up to creep to Tony Blair today. And he just, I mean, the great thing about satire is when it's really good, you don't have to do anything, but just write it down. He's got Una King here who said, "I have never started a question by congratulating you, but I have to break this habit of a lifetime because of the astonishing work by you, the Chancellor, and Claire Short
Oh God, I
in combating world
She
poverty."
tried to have it both ways, you know. I'm not a creep, but here I am creeping.
Astonishing was definitely the comedy word. We've got Trevor Kavanagh and the Sun over there, giving it to Blair by a whisker at question time. And then down here we've got another brilliant political comedy story. Geoffrey Archer is going to announce on tonight with Trevor McDonald tomorrow that his comeback will be starring in a play that he has written himself in the West End. And he'll be starring as a doctor who's poisoned his wife over several years.
Really?
And then every night the audience will act as a jury and vote on whether he's guilty or not.
It's amazing. I mean, 1 minute he thought he was going to be Mayor of London, and now he's...
Well, what he isn't doing is retiring to his garden to prune his roses. He's written a West End play for himself to star in.
He's still performing,
fashion.
Isn't he?
He certainly is.
He's a great performer.
He's a battler, and he's not giving up. Speaking of which, we've got EC to adopt Kinnock's fraud reform. This is a typical little Daily Mail story just sneaked in. it's all going ahead for Kinnock in Brussels.
Oh, really? Oh, that's rather nice of the Daily Mail to say that for him. Uncharacteristically, perhaps. Sean, thanks very much indeed. That's it for tonight. Sean Williams is here tomorrow night with all eyes on the Home Secretary's decision on General Pinochet. Will he let him go back to Chile? Most of the papers seem to think he will. Will he come back to the House to explain his thinking to MPs? Which is he going to do first? I'll be back next week. Until then, good night.